Bueno, continuamos con el workshop número 3, digamos, diseñado para honrar a nuestros estudiantes de doctorado. Hoy tenemos la presencia, que nos grata mucho, al profesor Jean-Michel. Jean-Michel is head of the Industrial Research Chair in Cellulosic Ethanol and Biocommodity at the University of Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada. He was previously a postdoctoral research in chemical engineering at the University of Sherbrooke, Canada. He received his PhD and master's degree in wood science from Laval University, and his interests are relating to the biofuel, biorefinery, and environmentally friendly chemical. Jean-Michel, it's a great honor to have you here, and welcome to this workshop.
Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank you, Professor Farid, for inviting me here. And I would also like to thank everybody online looking at my presentation and seeing all this today. So I'm going to switch to presentation. So I would have, of course, I've preferred to visit Colombia myself and take advantage of the warm weather down south, because here it's still winter, not yet finished winter. We're getting into spring, but still, it's still cold. So I kind of would have enjoyed seeing you in person, but we all know the problem right now with traveling. But eventually, I hope that I get to go to Colombia and meet in person, finally meet in person with you guys. So first slide is because Professor Farid mentioned our work in biofuel, and we have been working in biofuel for about a decade, a little bit more than a decade, maybe 11 or 12 years now. And in the meantime, we decided to invest a little bit of time as well into food engineering, because with the upcoming challenge that we will have at a global scale, energy, of course, is one of them, water is another one, and food eventually will be another important one. And that being said, without going into the aspects of large food production, we started small with something really peculiar to Quebec and Canada, which is maple syrup. So just briefly, I'm going to tell you about how this came into place, because we have also a research chair in maple syrup technology. And this is a funny one, because production of maple syrup has been traditionally done in Quebec by families from...
Excuse me, Professor, you are not presenting full presentation, please.
Oh, better now?
No, we can see.
I don't think I can do better than that. I think it's my Mac that allows me not to be able to.
Yeah, so sorry.
Now?
Jean-Michel,
No.
we need...
Sorry?
No,
we can see completely full screen.
Full screen.
So it's good now.
No.
It's no good.
Full screen we need.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're going to get full screen out of this.
But
I'm pretty sure. You think?
No.
No, I don't think I can do more than that.
It's maybe if you close and coming back.
Maybe you will try
again.
Okay, I can try.
Sorry to the audience, but this can happen live.
Yeah. So do you see the presentation now?
You're working with two screens, right?
No, I'm still working with one screen, but with a Mac pattern, or I have a MacBook, so a MacBook may not give you exactly the same results as a PC. So yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to do magic with this one. So when I see it myself, I'm in full presentation, so I have full screen.
Also you can increase the zoom of the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Slides.
I'm gonna try this one.
Try again, sorry.
It's not better now?
But it's dark. I don't know
dark.
why.
Yeah, and we're going back to what we were, right?
Okay. Sorry.
I think we're going to be stuck with this if you don't mind. You're going to see the following slide, but I don't mind if you see the following slide. I don't have big punches at the end. So you see the other slides on your side?
Can I see the first slide of your presentation? But
It's right there.
But it's dark. Just something new.
Is it better now?
No. Sorry.
Oh no, don't worry. I'm going to try it again, and we're going to make this happen. Share screen. Share screen. We're going to try something better. So do you see my screen now?
Yes. Put in full screen now. It's okay. Perfect.
Oh, we have it now. We're good.
We have now.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. So going back to what I was saying, so we have been working with biomass and conversion of biomass for decades. And at one point, we found it interesting to look into maple syrup production because it's basically unit operation. It's chemical engineering, but no one has been investing quite a lot of time into bringing new technology to this field or this sector. And it's pretty, people, as I was mentioning, while production of maple syrup was done by a lot of people with small production unit and never had the chance to go into like advanced technology and what engineering can bring. And the link between biofuels, biomass, and maple syrup is that, well, when you're producing maple syrup, you involve trees, and those trees are maple trees, and those trees are producing sugar. And so if you want to produce ethanol out of biomass, as an example, you will need eventually to get sugar out of this biomass in order to ferment it into ethanol. So there's an interesting link between the two fields, but now we're working in maple syrup, as I mentioned. And the picture that you see behind is what it looks like in a maple forest at this time of year, maybe a little bit like 2 weeks before this day, but it looked a little bit like this. So if you never saw winter, it looks a little bit like this, and it was pretty cold. Now it's getting better. So moving forward with the biofuel. So we work on different subjects. So the way we deal the technology at the lab is a little bit different from what people are usually doing at university. So we tend to accommodate our industrial partner and find solution for those partners depending on what are their issues. So in most cases, our partners are from the biofuel industry, of course, from the maple syrup industry. But we have been working on different aspects of different technology along the years. So for decades, we have been working on gasification with companies. We are now working on liquefaction. We have been working on pyrolysis, hydrolysis, and other different technology that are linked to biofuel. So we don't necessarily push one theme in biofuel technology more than we have to accommodate what our partner requires. And why do we do that? Is because simply in Canada, the way funding is done is most of the funding is available when you have an industrial partner related to it. So we need to a certain point to adapt to the requirements and the necessity of our partner, which is not a bad thing because it allows us to get out of our zone of comfort, which is, I think, for a researcher, something really interesting. So going back to the presentation, we're going to start with a little geography because it's important. Biofuel and the way biofuel should be managed is not like having a silver bullet or a perfect technology that will be easy to plug and play everywhere across the globe. I think that the situation in Colombia is quite different than the situation that we have in Quebec, even in Canada. So I don't know if you know this, but Canada, from one way or from one end of Canada to the other end, well, it's about 5 to 6 hour flight. So if you fly from Montreal to Vancouver, it's about 6 hours. 6 hours is the same time flying from Montreal to Paris. So it's a big country, and the reality inside of the country changes depending where you are in the country. This will affect the energy, and this will in turn affect the biofuel production and the opportunity you have there. So when I started as a professor, I thought that, well, politics is something that I don't need to work with. I don't like interacting with politics or law or things like that. But eventually, I'd end up understanding politics are closely related to technology by the sense, and I'm going to talk about this further on, but you cannot go and think that you can develop technology without taking into account what are the politics where you are. So I know about the Canadian and the Quebec policies, and in Colombia, policy must be different. Of course, this is something that you should take into account before going forward and develop technology. It has to fit with the geography, the reality, and eventually the politics. Then we're going to go into fundamental and applied science. So we have been doing quite a lot of things, as I mentioned, and I'm going to focus on a specific subject or specific partners because we were quite involved in the development of their technology. The name of the partner is Resolve Technology, and I'm going to showcase what they're doing in terms of integration of all the utilization of what can be made of the carbon extract from lignocellulosic biomass. And fourth point is going to be a shameless promotion of my lab. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing, what are the different axes and what we can do here. We have the advantage of being a small city, a small, rather big university as compared to the population, but this allowed us to have certain advantage over biggest university in Canada or in Quebec. We'll see then further. So one thing that we need to take into consideration when looking into biofuel is geography. And geography is really interesting because in Canada, you have something like 10 million square kilometers of land available. And usually people in Canada are concentrated towards the south border, so towards the US. So Canada is and always has been seen as a good interface to interact with the US market, which is, to be honest, fairly bigger than the Canadian market. So the US is one of our biggest economical partner and has been for decades, if not centuries. One thing that is really important for us as well here is to see that the area, we're talking about close to 10 million square kilometers, is divided by a population of 38 million people. So 38 million people can seem to be a lot. But if you look into Colombia, so Colombia has an area of, well, a little bit more than 1 million square kilometer and a population of about 50 million people. So basically, looking at those two, there are way more people per square kilometer than what is going on in Canada. So this has advantages and this has flaws, and this can cause problem as well. The advantage is that since it's well populated and the population density is higher, transportation is to your advantage because, to be completely honest, if you go up north in Canada, and as an example, you try to take biomass up north and take it down south. So I don't know if you see the arrow there, but if you take it north from Quebec down to the like Montreal or the populated place in Quebec, well, transportation is going to be really expensive because there's basically no roads at this point. So if you go up north, you need to take a plane at one point if you want to reach the populated area, and I say populated, but the village that you're going to find there. And the other thing that you need to take into account, well, Canada is a big country, of course, but the reality is quite different from one ocean to the other. So the British Columbia province is bordered by the Pacific Ocean, while the Quebec province on the eastern seaboard is located close to the Atlantic Ocean. So the reality is quite different. The climate is quite different as well. So it's not as warm in British Columbia as it could be in Colombia, but it's way warmer than in Quebec. And this has an impact on the type of biomass that you're going to get there. So going back on Quebec as compared to Colombia, so if you see in Quebec, we have a little bit more area than you have in Colombia, but way less people. So this has an impact because, well, transportation will become a problem to ship different type of biomass. So the good thing is that there's a lot of biomass in Quebec. The bad thing is that, well, when you want to ship this biomass, you need to use roads, and the roads are not necessarily always available. And back in the day, someone really brilliant thought that using train was not a good deal in Quebec. So there's not a lot of railways here. So we have to rely on roads, and relying on roads rely on fossil fuel at this point, which in turn will be a kind of a problem if you're looking into reducing your carbon intensity. So a big overview of what's going on in Canada. If you want to sum it easily in one picture, this is what you have. If we start from Vancouver on the western side of the country, you have forest in Vancouver, there's a lot of biomass, lignocellulosic biomass, and you have hydro as well. Up north, biomass doesn't grow that much because it's fairly cold. So if you were able to produce energy out of snow or ice, it would be a good deal. But at this point, it's not easy to get any type of energy unless people would be to find like uranium or oil or coal or gas up north. Well, this part of the country is not really providing for a lot of the energy sector in the country. In Alberta and in Saskatchewan, you will find oil. So Canada exploits the oil sands. So we do produce oil and petroleum quite a lot, and we, I think, sell most of it to the US for refining. So Alberta is relying on fossil fuel quite a lot. And those guys are, I'm not saying this in the bad way, but those guys, in terms of carbon intensity and carbon footprint, are dragging us down. But we can understand perfectly why they're using oil, because it's available and it's cheap for them. So eventually, yes, of course, we have to reduce the carbon footprint and the carbon intensity, and we'll come to this a little bit later on. The rest of the prairies province are rich in agriculture. So they produce quite a lot of grains, quite a lot of food crops. And those food crops eventually are shipped a little bit across the world, as well as in the US, as well as in Canada, but do produce, sorry about that, do produce residual agricultural biomass. If you're going forward towards the eastern seaboard, Ontario and Quebec do produce a lot of lignocellulosic biomass. So forest is our strong suit. And in Quebec, contrarily to Ontario, we have a lot of hydropower. So this is why I'm telling you the policy and the reality may change from one side of the country to the other. Because if there was to be a policy towards I don't know, hydroelectricity, well, the center of the country will not be that happy about it as compared to the east and west part of the country. And don't forget, well, everybody has garbage, so waste is also a global problem as it is in Canada. So we're not as advanced as the European community in terms of waste, but waste are still a problem. And I think waste is one of the most interesting feedstock to provide biofuels in the near future. And when I say biofuel, it's a really large sense of the term. But keep in mind, waste are really important. So if I'm thinking about Colombia, where there's way more people on way less land, well, I guess waste should be something to consider eventually in the biofuel business. Now, do we call it biofuel when it's from waste? Well, that's not exactly the good term that they're using right now. So politicians and people in those spheres are referring as recycled carbon. So we're not talking exactly about biofuel because, as an example, if you're having like a plastic bag full of waste with plastic things in it, well, the plastic comes from petroleum or from oil. So it's not bio, but it's still recycled carbon, because if you're not landfilling this carbon and you're using it, you're not using oil during this time. So going into politics, and this is absolutely not my favorite part, but I had to learn about politics because politics do affect quite a lot what we're doing. So just a thought, we are producing technology, and we used to think that politics was not our problem. So when I began as professor, even when I was a researcher, I was a PhD student, I said, politics not important. I have an idea. I'm going to do liquefaction. Liquefaction is cool now. But basically, if the policies and the system is not designed for this, you're going to have a problem eventually. So this is how it impacts everything, especially in Canada. So I don't claim to know how it's working in Colombia or everywhere else across the world, but in Canada, this is what's going to happen. The policy will impact on investment. So if you're looking into new technologies like power-to-X technology, biofuel technology, liquefaction, name it, torrefaction, whatever. So the policy will allow the eventual investor to be confident about investing in those new technology. So we're still talking about venture capital, because when you're working to make biofuel, especially low carbon impact biofuel, what we used to call second generation biofuel, when you're looking into putting this into the market, well, eventually you will need to invest a couple of $100 million, if not close to $1 billion, to make it work. So eventually you will need investment. But people that do invest this level of funding, well, they want to have guarantees, and those guarantees will be provided by the policies. So my 2 cents from this, like it or not, we depend on suitable policies for R&D, and policy, well, is closer to what you're doing in the lab that you might think. So in Canada, policy began with CO2. So during COP21, the government of Canada decided to pledge to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And now there's a carbon tax in Canada that was established, I don't remember, a couple of years back. And in Canada, you have the opportunity per province to be going through the cap and trade system, such as what we have here in Quebec with California. Otherwise, you have to complain or to go forward with the usual carbon tax mandated by the federal government. So in terms of greenhouse gas emission, Canada pledged to reduce 30% below 2005 by 2030, while Quebec pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 37.5% below 1990 by 2030. So you say, okay, Quebec is way more dedicated in reducing greenhouse gas emission. Well, if you remember the map earlier, you will exactly know why. Because we have hydro, we have huge resources of hydro. So this would explain why we are confident to go a bit higher than the federal or the full country pledge. So what I want to bring to your attention, in both cases, there are only 9 years left. So time is ticking. And 10 years, when you're thinking about it in university years, it's like dog years. No, but when you're thinking it in university years, it's rather long. So 10 years, you can develop a lot of things. But in 10 years, going from lab scale to full industrial scale, well, basically, that's not easy. So government of Canada knew that from the problem we had with greenhouse gas emission, transportation was one of the biggest ones. So industry, of course, is a problem and does emit greenhouse gas, especially the oil industry in Alberta, and as well the pulp and paper, the aluminum, and all those industries are emitting greenhouse gases. But transportation in the country is one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gases. So the federal government decided to go a bit further and target directly transportation towards a policy they call Clean Fuel Standard. So the Clean Fuel Standard, I think I'm going to talk about it in the next slide, but is intended to decrease the amount of reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel being used in transportation. At the Quebec level, they went a little bit further in terms of policy. So they decided to increase, or they plan to increase, the amount of biofuel that's going to be in gasoline and in diesel. In addition, they declared that they want to ban the sale of combustion engine by 2035. It's a good message. Would it be possible? Time will tell. Because again, Quebec has a lot of hydro, so they focus on using electric car or electric vehicles to cope or to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. It's not a bad idea. They're playing with what they have, and it's completely logical in the actual situation. Will EV be the only option or the only possibility? Maybe not. I think it's going to be a combination of different things. Biofuel is going to be in there. Hydrogen is going to be in there. PTX fuel, and so forth. So Clean Fuel Standard, going fast on this, the Clean Fuel Standards targets the oil producer in Canada. So basically they need to reduce their carbon intensity. Carbon intensity means from well to wheel oil going towards gasoline, as an example, will generate this amount of greenhouse gases. So progressively, you need to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas being linked to the production up to the combustion of these fuel. So how can you reduce this? Well, you have either to optimize the process, adding more biofuel would be another option, investing in new technology would be another option. So these are the options that allows the oil industry to reduce their carbon intensity and eventually respond to the requirements of the federal government. And if they don't want to do the first one, well, they have to pay extra towards credits. So as an example, from my understanding, if I do produce low carbon intensity ethanol in a facility, and if I add a facility, I could generate credits and eventually sell those credits to the oil industry, allowing them not to literally reduce their carbon intensity, but they would cope and pay like an extra taxation for not doing so. During this time in the European Union, so the European Union for many years during the Trump administration has been a reference for the Quebec and I would guess Canadian government in terms of policy, because the European Union is really focused on reducing their greenhouse gas emission, and they're really dedicated toward this goal. So to make a long story short, because they have made or they put forward what they call the Renewable Energy Directive 2, which involve a 14% increase of renewable fuel by 2030, which from it, 3.5% should be considered as advanced. What does advanced biofuel means? So advanced biofuel should represent 65 greenhouse gas reduction for bio-based fuel and 70% greenhouse gas reduction for non-bio-based fuel. So what are non-bio-based fuel? Power-to-X fuels are an example of those fuel. Power-to-X, really fast, what does it mean if you don't know? So if you have renewable electricity, such as in Quebec, hydroelectricity, and instead of storing this electricity in a battery, you decide to use this electricity to chemically convert carbon dioxide to produce, as an example, methanol or even ethanol or gasoline, then you're creating a synthetic fuel that is not linked to a bio-based product. This is what we call power-to-X fuels. Power means power, to X means, well, you're using renewable power to produce something. Could be a chemical, could be fuel. So what are the advantages for Quebec? In Quebec, we have forest biomass, we have tons of hydroelectricity, and as everybody else, we have garbage. So how can we take advantage of this to produce more biofuel, taking into consideration the reality and the greenhouse gas reduction that we need to address? So forest biomass would be one of the most available type of lignocellulosic biomass that we have, for the only reason that the forest sector is really efficient, not efficient necessarily, but really proficient in Quebec. They're producing quite a lot of lumber for the US market, for the Canadian market. So producing lumber and all sorts of things of this such generates a lot of residue. So we're producing sawdust, wood chips, bark, and it used to be a time when wood chips would have would be a feedstock for another industry called the pulp and paper industry. But as you know, you probably have a phone, you probably have a tablet, and paper is less and less used. And used to have newsprint, but newsprints are more and more available online and less available in paper form. So the pulp and paper industry decreased quite a lot in Canada, which means that we have forest biomass. We're still exploiting this biomass to produce lumber and so forth, but the residues are not taking as much client as they used to. So what can be done with forest biomass? Of course, you can produce ethanol. So in biomass, you have cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. And among this, well, cellulose and hemicellulose have fermentable sugars. So if you use this part of the biomass, well, you can eventually end up with ethanol production. The good thing about going this way is that, well, you can already use the existing infrastructure or fermentation system and distillation system that are available pretty much everywhere in North America for the production of ethanol. So this is the good point. You can take the lignocellulosic biomass and go towards another route, towards thermochemical process, and convert this biomass into, I don't know, gasification syngas, or through liquefaction into a bio route or something like that. In all those cases, one of the problems that you're gonna have is that, well, you know, biomass, I guess most of you guys are working with biomass. So the problem with this is that, well, biomass has a lot of oxygen and far lesser interesting hydrogen or carbon ratio as compared to fossil fuel, which means that at one point you need to remove oxygen and you need, sorry about that, to increase hydrogen. So how can you do this? Well, in Quebec, we have hydro, so it could be a good deal. So hydro could provide hydrogen to upgrade eventually syngas or pyrolytic oil or liquefaction products and so forth. Of course, you have the garbage, and one of the way you can treat garbage or waste in terms of producing biofuel would be toward gasification or thermochemical processes. So in Canada, we have different options, and in Quebec especially, we have different companies working in all those sectors. I put biodiesel in there, but keep in mind that Quebec, as compared to maybe the prairies, does not produce a lot of grain. But we do produce grain, but not as much as the prairies. So the price of oil is more expensive, like canola oil, which is one of the biggest produce of Canada in terms of oil. Well, it's more cheaper in the prairies as compared to in Quebec. So if you want to do biodiesel in Quebec, you need to import the oil, and this will get tricky. But still, people are doing it. But in a long-term perspective, it might not be the way to do it. So these are the companies working on these aspects in Quebec, and many of those companies were or are some of our partners, and we are helping them work on those technology. So this was for passenger car and small vehicles transportation. If you're going larger, like trains, well, you need other types of fuel. And again, forest biomass, lipid, and recycled carbon could be part of the equation, because forest biomass, if you go thermochemical plus upgrading, you can move toward, with a Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, towards something that would be alkane-like to feed eventually trains and those heavy transportation. Well, in Quebec, it's mostly truck, but we still do have train yet. Lipids, as I mentioned, well, we do have yellow grease and white grease that could be used toward hydrotreatment to produce a green diesel to be fed into trains and trucks. And recycled carbon, thermochemical plus upgrading could be part of the solution. In all cases, since we have electricity, well, we can produce hydrogen. Of course, there's different ways to produce hydrogen, but since electricity is fairly cheap in Quebec, we're talking industrial rate about 4.3 to 4.7 cents Canadian per kilowatt hour, so it's quite cheap. It could be a solution to boost the hydrogen content of different fuels. If you're looking into air transportation or jet fuel, again, you have different options. A recycled carbon and forest biomass could be used. Lipid could be used, but we still have the same problem as previously. Hydrogen from electricity could be an equation for the carbon as well, for lignocellulosic as well as the recycled carbon. But eventually, hydrogen could be combined with CO2 coming from the emission of different facilities or industries in order to produce jet fuel. So these are part of the Power-to-X technology, and it would be particularly interesting because it would address two big problems at the same time. So if you have an industry emitting carbon dioxide and you have cheap renewable electricity on the other side, if you remove the CO2 being produced by the industry on one side and combine with the hydrogen being produced from the hydroelectricity, then you have a fuel that addresses the reduction of greenhouse gas from the industry, as well as produce synthetic fuel for the fuel sector. So it's quite interesting on that side. Biofuel can be a very large term and could be applied to household and industries. So lignocellulosic biomass can be transformed into pellets. Interesting part about pellets is that the RED II policies in Europe will require for European heat, cooling, and electricity to have at least 50% renewable in it. So a lot of countries in the US rely on combustion of coal. So co-firing with biomass is eventually something I think that will grow big. Bio oil could also be a feed for industry for production of that said bio oil to replace, as an example, bunker C oil, and eventually garbage could be used or waste could be used to produce partly biogas that could be used to feed industries or homes. Again, same concept, but if you combine power-to-X technology to the industrial complex, so if you take forest biomass or lignocellulosic biomass or recycled carbon from waste, you can produce either biogas or a combination, biogas, pellets, or bio-oil that could serve as a feed for industrial complexes. Now, where it gets interesting, if you, as an example, use forest biomass, convert the waste into pellets, feed the pellets in the industry. Now, the CO2 that you're emitting from the industry could be treated with the hydrogen being produced from the hydro to produce more fuels and commodities. Where it gets interesting, you're not only neutral on carbon emission, you're going on the negative side of carbon emission. You're actually paying our debt toward the carbon in the atmosphere. And this is why the BTL, the Biomass Technology Laboratory, is now proud to have a new professor working exclusively on the PTX technology to allow us to buckle the buckle or close the loop and be able to convert this CO2. So in light of all this, how to combine all this, we help a partner of ours called Resolve Energy. So Resolve Energy is a startup company, and this startup company, well, they want to use lignocellulosic biomass to produce different types of biofuel. That's fine. So when you use lignocellulosic biomass, as I mentioned earlier, you have carbohydrate-based structures such as cellulose, hemicellulose in there. Those can be fermented to produce ethanol. So you see on the left-hand side, one of the products from this will be low carbon intensity biofuel, low carbon intensity ethanol. But you still have lignin. And lignin, of course, has been a problem for decades. For those of you who have been around for decades, you know that lignin, well, we try to do pretty much everything about it, but one thing that sure works is burning it. So with Resolve, we're looking into a process to convert this lignin into pellets, like black pellets, that we can eventually burn to produce energy at industrial scale or whatever. But we found out that, well, lignin is the one that gets all the ashes at one point where you're converting lignocellulosic biomass. And ashes don't fit well with a good price when you want to sell pellets. So we designed another technology to convert lignin into biogas in combination with the C5 stream, because when you're hydrolyzing hemicellulose or cellulose, you're producing sugar. C6 sugar will ferment fast. C5 sugar, well, they will ferment, but not as fast, and you need GMOs organism to make it work. So instead of waiting for this to ferment, use C5 streams and send it to the biogas production. So this would be an integrated biorefinery where all the carbon that goes in goes out as a product. And eventually, if you added the power-to-X technology, then you have a negative carbon footprint for this industry, which is interesting. So with the Resolve process, we started from another type of process that we eventually migrated toward what it is right now. So we used to work with paper, with cellulose. So we extract cellulose with, I don't know, steam explosion or organosolv processes. Get cellulose out, then hydrolyze cellulose with acids. Then we said, okay, it's cool, but we need to extract the cellulose. Less cool, more expensive. What if we try like wood chips directly? We tried it, it worked. So I asked the team, hey guys, what about using bark directly? Why bark? Because this is the nastiest type of lignocellulosic biomass you can think of. And not only that, I said, why not use bark? Let's use softwood bark, which is even nastier. So the guys, okay, well, we're gonna try. They tried it and it worked. So from this, we can get a business plan, because from all the residues that we have in Quebec from the wood sector, well, bark is the one that is not that much loved. Nobody's really using bark. So this is why it gets interesting, extracting the sugar from bark, using the lignin from bark, and so forth. This is exactly what I said. So we started by the production of ethanol from this bark. So we had to struggle because at the same time, we're not using enzymes and we're not developing enzymes. We have never been in 10 years working on enzyme because it's complicated. We don't have the expertise, and people are doing this way better than we do, and they have big companies doing this. So we don't mind with this. We go with acid. And can you keep a secret, guys? We're using sulfuric acid. So it's the baseline when you want to work with biomass. Sulfuric acid, we had the challenge of recuperating a maximum of sugar while recuperating a maximum of acid at the same time. So this was where we work on the technology. And at the end, the interesting part is that we recover, at this point, this is an old graph, but at this point, I think we're recovering most of the C6 sugars for fermentation, while the amount of inhibitors is pretty much close to zero. So after 36 hours of fermentation, you see that whenever if you're using a synthetic media that is made to compare and to work, well, our bark hydrolysate and hydrolysate that we made from poplar and corn stover were also pretty efficient in fermenting. So rule of thumb there, and really interesting for our partner, they can use bark processes directly with our process without pre-treatment, without steam exclusion, without organosolv or pulp and paper to extract cellulose. You can use directly bark and produce sugar that can be fermented to acid. So this led to this first pilot. This was my first baby. So we don't have a lot of time, but eventually I can tell you how did I get out of my zone of comfort a couple of times in my life, and I learned, or I taught myself how to think outside of the box. The first pilot was something like big for me because the first pilot we made was something different. It's bigger. We used to work with small reactors, 1 liter. Now we're talking about something that has close to 1,000 liter that we need to design. We have a limited budget. What do we do with that? So to be completely honest, we went to the hardware store. We bought something that thought that could work, like something that is used to make bread or make cakes. We put the ingredients in there, we destroyed it, but the concept was there. So from this, we built our first pilot, which is still functional at result. Now, what about pellets? So the pellets, well, we have lignin, and lignin is not usually processed to produce pellet, but it's pretty interesting as a material to produce pellets because most of the energy density of biomass is in lignin for the only reason that lignin has far less oxygen as compared to cellulose or hemicellulose. So we decided to process this lignin to produce pellets. First, it looked at what it looked like a little bit like what you have on the left-hand side, nasty. And eventually, we're moving towards what looks like pellets on the right-hand side. And the interesting thing is that, and we didn't have time to like exploit all the information, but we got the lignin from poplar wood, from corn stover, from bark, and the lignin was quite different in terms of property and how it looks in general. So if you look at the heating value of softwood bark lignin, you see per unit of gigajoule per ton, it's pretty high as compared to usual biomass where you get like 18 or 90 gigajoule per ton. Poplar wood lignin has 24. So now you're reaching the lower limit of petcoke, which is also interesting. You're way out of the range of the usual pellets. And look at the color. It's really interesting because you have usually this brownish color for lignin, while if you go to corn stover, you have a yellowish color. And so we didn't exploit this, but there's a lot of publication to be made on the fundamental aspect of this. So who's the guy in charge of the pellets in the lab? He's from Colombia. So if you want to know about his story, take a look at the YouTube link down there, and you'll see what Sergio is doing in terms of lignin and the challenges. So we didn't scale up the pelletization process, but still we're using a fairly large pellet machine, and our partner Resolve has bought like big scale pellet machine in order for us to validate the different things that we're optimizing. What about biogas? So if some of you did produce biogas through like with biotechnological processes, you know that, well, you need a certain nitrogen to carbon ratio, and maybe you know one thing for sure, lignin does not produce biogas. So we had a challenge there because, well, the microorganisms really don't like lignin. So if you look at the curve right there, the red one is raw lignin. And why did the cumulative methane production increase at the beginning? it was the time for the microorganism to adapt and to die. So lignin does not produce biogas. So we needed to transform lignin into something interesting. We needed to do a pre-digestion of the lignin in order to make the microorganism like it a little bit better. So we did this, and now this is an old graph, but now we're reaching bigger scale, and it works pretty well. And this is what we did with all that. So we started with small scale system, and we had the opportunity to design a 10,000 liter biogas pilot plant. And you see there, it's quite simple. We bought totes. We call it totes in French. I don't know if it's the same thing. You know what I mean? Like 1 cubic meter volume thing in plastic. And we upgrade those systems with a sensor, automation, and so forth, to be able to operate all of them together or each of them independently for all our testing. And the people you see there on the picture are the architect of all this. So it's one thing to have the ideas, but those guys made it happen. So they each have their function in the team. So we have a guy really good in automation. We have a guy really good in welding. We have Kemi, which is an expert in biotechnologies. So you see, and if I don't mention it enough, it's not me, but it's basically the lab and the team that did achieve all those things. So, of course, we could go further into discussing about the different things that we did, about our 10 years in gasification and so forth. But I just wanted to showcase to you guys how we can integrate and try thinking out of the box into making technology that people are not necessarily doing right now in literature. And one thing that we do at the lab, we often have group meetings where everybody's invited, technician, interns, everybody. And no idea is about ID. And it doesn't mean because I'm El Jefe that my ideas are good. No. I like to be challenged, and I'm so happy when people find better ideas than my ideas. So the concept is take advantage of the whole team. To finish, I think I still have a little bit of time. So the Biomass Technology Laboratory started as a chair and become way more. So we had the opportunity to take advantage of the vision of the University of Sherbrooke to focus on renewable technology, on sustainable development and so forth. So originally we start with biofuel, but progressively we develop different entities inside of the Biomass Technology Laboratory. The oldest infrastructure in the lab is dedicated to biofuels. So we're working right now on what you saw. We're also working on liquefaction. We're working on pyrolysis of tires, waste tire to recycled carbon, and we work on different biotechnological processes. We also have this chair working on maple syrup. So Krita that you see down there is dedicated to improve the unit operation in the maple syrup industry. The e-fuel one is led by my colleague Bruna, and Bruna is working on power-to-X technology and using renewable electricity to convert carbon dioxide into biofuel. The lab, finally, we have here an infrastructure, incredible infrastructure, analytical, allowing us to characterize pretty much everything, liquid, solid, or gas. So we have 24, 25 instrument, high-tech instrument, LCMS stuff, ICP-MS, name it, we have all of those. So this has become so big and so efficient that we decided to make an entity out of it. So it looks a little bit like this. We were lucky enough to have our own building. So I don't know if we were good enough, we were annoying enough, or the administration of the university had feared that we might explode at one point, but they decided to build us a building a little bit down south, like not even 1 kilometer down south of the main campus, for us to have all our toys and to play all together into producing biofuel and working with the maple syrup industry. So here you see a picture of our guys on the left-hand side. This is the whole team, but we had new people, including a lot of people from Colombia joining the team. and you see people having fun. Usually we like people having smiles. So on the left hand side, there are masks, but people are usually smiling. And for those of you who know Mariceli, she's right there. She's making fun of two colleagues, so this is fine. And we had so far a lot of fun. So in the energy sector, we're happy to have a lot of partners. These are the actual partner we have, not all of our partners in the last 10 years. We had way more than that. In the food industry, we have those guys. So most of them are related to the maple syrup industry. Those are the funding agency. And finally, well, I think I'm going to close with this. So if you have any question, if you want to join us.
Thank you so much, Jean-Michel. Very, very wonderful conference. Thank you so much. I think in the next future, very close, we are work with you about that, okay? It's very, very pleasure for me. I would like to invite Javier Ordóñez and Mari to stay with us. Okay.
Thank you. Javier, do you want to ask questions?
Mary, I would like that would you like to introduce some comment, general comment before the question of Javi?
Okay, no, for me it's a pleasure to work with Jean-Michel. It's been like 5 years that I've been working with him. It's very interesting that all the projects that we have are very connected with the industry and the government policies. So I was thinking that in Colombia, we have difficulties to have a good relationship with the academia and the government. So I just want to ask you, Jean-Michel, how did you establish that connection with the government and to help to the government to change the thinking about the use of fossil fuels to biofuels, for example?
Well, there's two aspects to this. So the government already know and they already pledged to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So they know they have to move forward. But where can you get involved is that I did a lot of propaganda. I call them, I say, okay, guys, we're doing this for a living. We know exactly what's going on. We have been involved in the European Commission. We know the policy. We can help. And it didn't work the first time. You had to hit quite a lot of time on the nail, but eventually said, okay, maybe we can ask those guys. Maybe they know something. And always go there modest. You say, okay, guys, I'm from the university. I live in an ivory tower. I understand this, but I can help you figure out some things that you might not know about, or some technology that looks incredible for you guys, but basically have been around for centuries and you don't know about.
Okay.
But it's a matter of being like patient with that.
Okay. Okay.
Javi, would you like to give us some comment about the
Yes. First, I would like to say thank you. It was very interesting at that moment because our economy is looking for options, and bioeconomy looks like a new possibility to integrate a lot of resources that we have here in Colombia. But some questions that we proposed this week, and after a lot of conferences and presentations as yours, was how to transform Colombia as a country, Colombia, in a transformer of biomass to obtain products, and not just an exporter and a commercializer of biomass. Because usually we have this problem with the carbon was the same. We started to exporting carbon, for example, and probably in the future we started to exporting biomass for another markets. But how improve our probability to transform our country in a producer of commodities or biofuels or other chemical products from biomass?
Well, it all goes back to policies, because policy is really important to have investor invest in Colombia. So if the Colombian government says, okay, we're willing to back up or support to a certain point with funds, company that will establish in Colombia to produce ethanol, to produce biogas, then the company will have to come to Colombia, and you will not necessarily have to export this biomass, and you will be able to take advantage of this here. The government can also say, okay, even better, when it's a local development, and if it does make sense in the Colombian infrastructure and the Colombian sector, we could provide even more support through universities and so forth. So there's a way to promote new technology from inside, and there's a way as well to have companies established in Colombia. But I don't think it's a good idea to think that we can reinvent the wheel on all aspects. So if there are good technology in Colombia, fine. But if there's not, I think going toward renewable and in the optic of keeping your biomass local, policy would be a good way to attract companies to establish here, well, there in Colombia.
Yeah, okay, it's very well.
Jean-Michel, there are a question from the audience. It's coming from Juan Carlos Maya. He said that, thank you very much. What do you consider to be the most suitable products derived from biomass for countries of the tropics such as Colombia?
Well, this is a complicated question. We'll go back to, is there any silver bullets? So there's not a magic compound, but my answer would be as simple as the one that you can get the most money out of. Because if you have a side product, as an example, produced from lignin, that is sold at $4,000, $8,000, $10,000 per ton, then you have to focus way less on the process itself to produce ethanol. So ethanol will become a side product, and your main product will be the one that pays more. So back in the days, people were looking quite a lot at vanillin for the food industry. But the problem with vanillin, if you produce too much, well, the price of vanillin will drop. But at this point, vanillin per ton is really expensive. So, but there's not really a good answer for this. It's all a matter of the market and what's the best you can get. But the energy is always on the lower end of the utilization of the biomass. In that sense that if you're able to produce a plastic out of lignin, as an example, it will be more profitable for you as compared to produce phenol, benzene, or a chemical like that. Of course, in the southern hemisphere, such as in the northern hemisphere, you can also look into extractive, secondary metabolites. And I'm pretty sure people have been looking into this in Colombia as they are looking in Canada and Quebec. So you have different plants in Colombia growing there that doesn't grow necessarily across the world. So in those plants, there might be secondary metabolites or extractive that may have high value. But if you're looking into producing large scale infrastructure, it's risky to focus on those type of compounds. So I would say focus on what pays the most, then try to use this benefit to reduce the risk on the ethanol or the biofuel production. Because even though if you're pushing towards a molecule that will have high value, there will still be a necessity for fuel, because you only have to transport this molecule somewhere, so you will need fuel at one point. Having these compounds, and the good reference for this, and a really good example, you know that in Canada, cannabis is now legal. So cannabis is an interesting one, and I always saw cannabis as a gateway towards second generation biofuel. Why is that? Because cannabis, you sell the leaves for different purposes, but the rest of the plant is worthless because the leaves are so expensive that right now people that are producing cannabis in Quebec or in Canada, they don't care about this biomass. They want you to get rid of this biomass because they're making a lot of profit from the rest. So if you're finding a high profit compound or market out of your biomass, then the rest becomes quite cheap to produce.
Yeah.
Okay, I have an last question before I give the word to Mari and Javier. This is my question. It's the same that I asked to Eric. We have a coal here in Colombia. You know, everybody in the world feeling that the coal as enemy. But what do you think about if you want or decide to mix with biomass, coal and biomass?
Well, there's two ways to see this again. So you have reserve of coal, and one way to see this, and the people thought that we had a reserve of oil here in Quebec on different islands in the St. Lawrence River. But people said, what is your option with this? Either you wait for the energy crisis to go further, then your coal will value way more, and people might be less looking into the greenhouse gas emission linked to coal. Or eventually, yes, you could mix with biomass, and if you go something like gasification with the concept of co-firing with biomass, you will reduce the carbon intensity of your coal, getting it towards something greener. And this is exactly what the Clean Fuel Standard intends to do with oil. With oil, they're asking first to be more efficient, but progressively to reduce the carbon intensity. And how can you do this? By adding biofuel or biomass one way or the other.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would like that Mary and Javier give on the last comment.
There are
Thank you so much,
one question.
Jean-Michel. Very wonderful conference.
There are questions from the audience. I think yes.
Yes, Carlos Londoño. This is coming from Carlos Londoño. What kind of technology do you think that is most suitable to get the highest carbon conversion to obtain biofuel?
Again, there's a lot of answers. So you could go like, for gasification, you have different options of gasifier. So which one would be the best one to recover the more carbon? Liquefaction, same goes. Overall, I think that, and this is my personal opinion that doesn't involve any of our partners, but I think that being logic would be to use biomass and use really a biorefinery process where you extract different fraction of the biomass and you use a sugar on one side, you use a lignin on the other side, and you combine eventually with renewable electricity to make it work. Because at the end, I think you're going to end up with ratio of production of ethanol, because if you look gasification as compared to fermentation from lignocellulosic biomass, you will always end up with the same ratio of ethanol being produced per ton of biomass. So if you go thermochemical, you're going to end up there. If you go biological, you're going to end up there. So it's all a matter of optimization, reducing the cost of chemical, reducing the cost of energy. But my personal opinion would be go through a classical biorefinery, go through the production of sugar, maybe combined with thermochemical and lignin, but it needs quite a lot of optimization. And I think thermodynamics at one point and the oxygen content of the biomass will limit us to go more than what is logical.
Thank you. There are another question coming from Miriam Rojas. It would be interesting to do hybrid business system where both the main products and the residues, for example, coffee and its residue, are processed. Is it possible, or are there some restrictions?
There's always restriction. This is what's fun about life, and this is why there's university. There's restriction, and we need to find ways to go around it or to solve it. Let's say it like this: to solve the problems. So if we take into my humble opinion, I really love Colombian coffee, but I've never been into a coffee plantation, and I don't know nothing about coffee. Instead, what I buy in terms of grain already torrefied. But if people from the coffee industry, and maybe this person that has a question is from the coffee industry, yes, there would be. What would I see if I was hired as a consultant from the coffee industry? Wink, wink. I'm joking. So if I had to do a mandate, I would use torrefaction there, because torrefaction is already available for the coffee industry. They're using it. So why not use torrefaction, torrefied residual biomass, pelletize this and sell it, or co-fire with coal? It would be like my 2 cents as fast as I can get. But yeah, it could be a good way. And when we're working with our partners, the objective is always to find either a product or a technique that already use something that they have or they will use. So as an example, if we're working on a process and the partner is producing ethanol, so we'll try to bring back ethanol on the menu in terms of chemical because we know that the partner is producing ethanol. So as an example, if a coffee industry does produce coffee through torrefaction and they already have energy, heat exchanger, we try to take advantage of this energy. We torrefy part of the residual plant, we make pellets, and they feed their own system with those pellets. Now they can package it and sell it more to the customer because up north, if they say, okay, this coffee is carbon neutral, oh my God, I'm gonna pay $5 more for it. I don't know what it means, but I'm gonna pay $5 more. You see the point? So there, I think there's something to be done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will waiting for you for your visiting to my country, to my university. Maybe the end of this year or the next year. You know, the pandemic is very terrible for us, but
Yes.
it will be a great pleasure that you have here with us.
It would be a pleasure.
Javier.
Okay, thank you so much. It really was a very interesting conferences. Actually, all the topics that you touch in your conferences are of our interest. For example, now the government are very interested here in Colombia to do policies about the green and blue hydrogen productions. And the question is, what do you want to do with this hydrogen? Improve pool fuels or produce ammonia, or what you can do with this, because you cannot transport, for example, here.
Well, you could transport, but it's a tricky one because you need to compress or find a way to store hydrogen. So there's different vehicle for hydrogen, and it's funny because all the government around the world, I don't know if they don't know each other or they're not meeting at the United Nations, but they all have the same issues. We have been involved with the different government ourselves, and everybody has the same question. Okay, we're producing hydrogen. What do we do with hydrogen? So hydrogen needs a vector, and a vector could be different things. So when I was talking about Power to X, Power to X is a long shot right now because, well, those technologies are not yet there. But if you take a look on our website, we had an interview, not an interview, but a conference from a guy from Iceland for a company called Carbon Recycling International. And those guys are using CO2 as carbon source combined with hydrogen to produce methanol and eventually other fuel. So one thing that you could do with hydrogen is store it into carbon dioxide. And while doing this, you're hitting two birds with one stone, because you're reducing the greenhouse gas emission of your industry while producing fuel and chemicals. Of course, you can store it with biomass as well, because if you're doing gasification of biomass, what is your biggest issue? You don't have enough hydrogen. So there you go. Or you can even go to, like, I'm doing pyrolytic oil. How can I upgrade pyrolytic oil? Well, I need hydrogen. Here you go. So biomass can be a vector. Carbon can be a vector. Carbon dioxide for sure can be a vector. It's still a long shot, but people are looking into it, and especially in Europe, this is coming.
Very close session.
Can I say something, Magiseri?
Yeah, of course, you can.
So I don't want to take any commitment, but I started my Spanish class. So maybe if I do visit by the end of the year, I'm going to be able to talk Spanish. Maybe.
Nice,
Thank you.
nice.
Thank you so much.
The other interesting point is for students there in the audience, I would like to say, don't fear thinking out of the box. So usually you make a literature review and you follow what has been done, but don't fear of trying something else from time to time. Don't tell your professor, just try it. Make sure that it's not dangerous, but try it. Sometimes weird ideas can generate a lot of interesting things. That's all for me.
Yeah, okay, nice.
Thank you so much.
Michel,
Thank you
you
so
have
much.
to visit Colombia, and we will show you
will.
the coffee crops. It's amazing.
Amazing.
For sure. For sure.
I would like to finish with something. Or Professor Farid.
No. Continue.
Okay.
Now, I just want to invite some students, if they are motivated and if they want to join us, they are free to contact us. I know that Professor Farid Chegne has our emails, so they can contact us and join our team.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you. Thank you for the presentation.
Bye-bye.